They spent 14 years together without a wedding. No vows, no papers, just trust between two people wanting opposite things. Johnny Depp craved freedom. Vanessa Paradis needed peace. What once kept them close eventually became the very thing that pulled them apart. Before they found each other, their lives moved in completely different rhythms. Johnny Depp lived in a storm he couldn't control. Vanessa Paradis lived in a quiet room she was trying to rebuild. And somewhere between those two worlds, their story was waiting. Johnny Depp, in the years before Vanessa, drifted through life like a man afraid to anchor. His relationships were short, impulsive, intense enough to pull him in, but never enough to keep him there. Friends described him as someone who loved deeply but lasted briefly, always carrying a sense of restlessness in his eyes. It came from childhood, from memories he refused to revisit, from nights when doors slammed harder than they should and mornings when he learned that silence was sometimes safer than words. Freedom became his protection. The idea of being tied down felt like stepping back into a room with no escape. Hollywood amplified everything. Fame made every heartbreak louder and every mistake more public. He wasn't just searching for love. He was searching for a place where he could be understood without being reduced to headlines. A place where he didn't have to prove anything. A place where he could breathe. Vanessa Paradis walked a different path, but her wounds were just as deep. She entered the spotlight far too young, pushed into a world where every smile was judged and every misstep became a headline. At 14, she had already learned what it meant to be adored and torn apart in the same breath. The stage gave her success, but it also took pieces of her she never got back. Her voice made her famous, but silence was what she truly valued. Away from cameras, she preferred mornings without makeup, afternoons spent writing quietly by a window, evenings with family instead of crowds. Peace was not a luxury for her, it was a longing. After years of being watched, she dreamed of a life where she could simply exist without having to perform. A home, not a spotlight. A partner, not an audience. They shared one painful truth. Fame had hurt them both. But how they responded to that pain revealed everything about who they were. Johnny ran from it. Vanessa turned it into a shell of calm around her. He escaped through movement. New places, new faces, constant motion. She survived through stillness, through choosing what was gentle, familiar, and steady. And this difference, this clash between a man who feared walls and a woman who craved them, was the quiet seed of the love story to come. A story built not on perfection, but on two lives shaped by different forms of loneliness. When they eventually met, it wasn't romance that drew them together first. It was recognition. Two people shaped by the same world, but carrying opposite answers to the same question. What do you do with the parts of fame that break you? He hid from them. She healed from them. And somewhere between hiding and healing, their paths converged. Paris, 1998. The city glowed in a soft golden light, the kind that makes everything look gentler, more romantic, and slightly dangerous. In the hallway of Hotel Costs, cigarette smoke floated lazily in the air, drifting through the low hum of old jazz playing from the lounge, a melody slow enough to make time hesitate, as if Paris itself knew something irreversible was about to happen. Johnny Depp was walking through that hallway, one step slower than usual. A glance, unintentional, almost accidental, toward the left. And then he saw her, Vanessa Paradis, standing by the railing, her hair falling loosely around her face. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't doing anything to draw attention. She simply existed, like a still frame inside a film running too fast. In that instant, Depp felt a single thought cut through the noise. My life is about to change. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was famous, but because in that fragment of a second, he saw the quiet he had been chasing for years. Vanessa turned when she heard his footsteps. She didn't startle. She didn't shift her expression. Her gaze was calm, so calm it unsettled something inside him. It wasn't the look of someone impressed by a Hollywood star. It was the look of someone seeing straight through the layers he wore to survive the world. Their energies clashed and aligned all at once. Vanessa carried the stillness of a room closed off from chaos. Depp carried the storm of years spent running, fearing walls, fearing promises, fearing the echo of a childhood that refused to disappear. Yet instead of pushing them apart, those opposites fell into a strange kind of balance. like two pieces that didn't match until the moment they finally did. They didn't talk about love. Not that night. Not even that week. They talked about fear. Depp spoke about a life too loud, too crowded, too fragile under constant lights. Vanessa spoke about growing up in a spotlight that swallowed her before she could understand what she was losing. There were no performances, no attempts at charm, no curated smiles. Just two strangers saying out loud the things they usually kept locked away. For the first time in years, Depp didn't feel judged. Vanessa listened in a way almost no one in Hollywood did. Quiet, steady, without interrupting or trying to fix him. There was something in her silence that made him feel safe, a kind of safety he had forgotten existed. And Vanessa, looking at Depp, didn't see the rebellious icon the world argued about. She saw a man exhausted to the bones, someone who had been running for so long he had forgotten why he started. Someone who needed a place to land, even temporarily. Love didn't begin with a confession. It didn't begin with attraction. It began with presence, the rare kind two wounded souls hesitate to offer. That Paris night had no promises, no vows, no talk of the future. Only two people standing close enough to hear each other breathe, discovering that the distance between them had suddenly disappeared. And sometimes, it's the moments that arrive without warning, without preparation, without intention, that become the ones that change everything. When Johnny Depp moved his life to France, something inside him shifted. Away from Hollywood, away from the noise, away from the mirrors that constantly reflected the version of him he didn't recognize. He found a small town where mornings were quiet and afternoons smelled of warm bread. In that world, he wasn't Johnny Depp the icon. He was simply the father who walked Lily Rose to school and carried little Jack on his shoulders through narrow stone streets. This wasn't a life he planned. It was a life Vanessa built, slowly, gently, like someone arranging fragile objects on a shelf, mindful that the slightest imbalance could make everything fall. She created a world where he could breathe, a world where waking up didn't feel like facing a battlefield, a world where fame softened at the edges, where he could buy groceries without cameras, where love didn't require performance. And in that quiet French home, two children were born. Lily Rose first, then Jack. Their laughter filled the rooms before their parents ever thought about filling out paperwork or planning a ceremony. The arrival of the children changed everything, but it didn't change the one question everyone else kept asking. Why aren't they married? The truth was simple, but not easy. Depp feared marriage the way some fear locked doors. His childhood had taught him that homes break, promises unravel, and love collapses under pressure when it tries too hard to hold itself together. He carried that fear everywhere, into relationships, into roles, into silence. Vanessa, on the other hand, didn't need a piece of paper to feel secure. She had lived her whole life in a world that demanded proof of everything. Proof of talent, proof of worth, proof of survival. But love, to her, was the one thing that shouldn't need a stamp or a signature. What mattered was the life they built, not the ceremony they avoided. They never spoke the agreement aloud, but it lived between them like air. Depp needed space, not from her, but from the idea of being trapped. Vanessa needed stability, not from a wedding, but from the daily rituals that made a family feel like a family. He needed a runway. She needed a home. So they learned to meet in the middle. When Depp had to leave for months of filming, Vanessa stayed behind with the children, maintaining the rhythm that kept their world from shaking. School mornings, family dinners, bedtime stories read in two languages. When Depp returned, worn from long shoots and long nights, he stepped into the gentleness she had preserved for him. A gentleness he didn't always deserve, but always needed. People often misunderstood their bond. They assumed a missing wedding meant a missing commitment. But interviews from those years told another story. Depp would say, "We don't need a wedding. We already have everything that matters." Vanessa echoing him in her quiet way, "We don't need ceremony. We need each other." There were no staged declarations, no lavish photo shoots, no elaborate explanations. Only mornings of sunlight through thin curtains. Only the sound of children playing outside. Only the feeling, the unmistakable feeling, that their love was real, even if it didn't fit into a traditional frame. This period became the most beautiful chapter of their 14-year story. But beauty is often fragile, and this chapter was no different. Beneath the calm surface lay a tension they both tried to ignore. The very thing that held them together was also the thing that could break them. For Vanessa, choosing not to marry wasn't a sacrifice, but it was a risk wrapped in faith. She believed in him, in them, in the way he softened when he held their children. But there were nights when he disappeared into his thoughts, and she wondered whether the freedom she gave him would one day carry him too far away. For Depp, staying committed without marriage was a victory over his past, but also a quiet fear. The more he loved her, the more he feared disappointing her. The more he built with her, the more he feared one wrong move would destroy everything. Still, they stayed. For 14 years. Not because of a wedding, but because of choice, a choice renewed in silence every day. This was the paradox of their love. They lasted longer without a marriage than many couples lasted with one. And yet, the seed of their ending, as gentle as it was heartbreaking, was already there. The need for freedom, the need for safety. Two truths that loved each other, but never fully aligned. But for a long, shining moment, those truths coexisted. And in that moment, they created a home, a family, and a love story that didn't need vows to be real. Only presence, patience, and the quiet belief that sometimes love survives best when it isn't forced into a shape it cannot hold. For many years, France had been Johnny Depp's refuge, the one place where he wasn't swallowed by celebrity. But as his fame rose higher than ever, the world he tried to escape slowly reached into the quiet life he shared with Vanessa. Hollywood wanted more of him. Bigger roles, longer shoots, more press, more everything. And with every new success, Paris drifted farther away. It began subtly. A few months of filming turned into half a year. A promotional trip stretched longer than planned. He missed school performances, birthdays, small family dinners that used to anchor him. The distance wasn't measured in miles, but in moments he didn't return for. Moments Vanessa held alone. And behind the cameras, something darker grew. Alcohol became a familiar companion again. The old escape he thought he'd left behind in the chaos of his youth. The roles he took on grew heavier, darker, demanding emotional weight that followed him home like a shadow he couldn't shake off. Hollywood pressure tightened around him like a grip on his throat, and he did what he had always done when the world felt too loud. He ran inward, somewhere silent, somewhere unreachable. Vanessa felt the shift before she heard it from anyone else. She noticed it in his voice when he called late at night, the exhaustion, the distance, the way he no longer painted pictures of coming home soon. She noticed it in the pauses, the way silence grew longer between their words. The invisible string that once kept them connected across continents was stretching, tight enough to tremble. A storm was forming, slowly, quietly, the way storms often do before they break. Long filming schedules, whispers from tabloids, rumors of late nights, parties, new faces hovering too close. Changes in his habits, sleeping less, drinking more, drifting in and out of conversations without fully being there. Vanessa tried to protect the life they had built. She kept the children's routines steady, maintained the softness of their home, kept the outside noise from reaching them. She didn't confront the rumors. She didn't accuse. She didn't demand. She simply waited, believing, hoping, that the man she loved would find his way back to her. But some distances can't be crossed just by waiting. Each time Depp returned home, something felt slightly off. Not dramatic, not explosive, just different. He moved through rooms like a guest, not a partner. He held the children with warmth, but his eyes were somewhere else. Even in the peaceful French countryside, the shadows of Hollywood clung to him. Vanessa felt the ache of loving someone whose body was present while his spirit drifted toward another world. She cooked the meals he once loved. She played his favorite old records. She tried to remind him, gently, silently, of the man he became in France, the man free from the noise. But love cannot always compete with pressure. Nor can peace compete with chaos when chaos feels familiar. She watched him slip, not all at once, but piece by piece. A forgotten promise. A delayed phone call. A trip extended without explanation. She didn't blame him. She didn't blame herself. She simply felt the quiet pain of someone witnessing the person they love getting farther and farther away while standing still. And beneath everything, a question began to take shape. A question neither of them dared to ask, but both felt tightening like a thread inside their chests. Was the decision not to marry still protecting their love? Or had it become a boundary keeping them from healing together? Vanessa wondered if the freedom she had given him, the freedom he needed, was now carrying him too far from home. Depp wondered if the stability she offered, the stability he needed, was now something he was failing to hold on to. Their greatest strength had become their greatest vulnerability. For years, not marrying had been their shield. A choice made from trust, not fear. A way to love without pressure, without expectation, without the ghosts of their pasts dictating their future. But now, in the growing space between them, that same choice began to cast a shadow. Without the anchor of commitment, without the structure of something binding them together, they drifted on parallel paths, close enough to see each other, but too far to touch. It wasn't betrayal that hurt them. It wasn't arguments. It wasn't a dramatic end. It was the slow, quiet realization that love can fade not from a lack of feeling, but from a lack of reaching back when distance begins to grow. And sometimes, the hardest truth in any long relationship is this. Even the gentlest love can fracture when two hearts need two different kinds of safety. It happened on an evening that looked, from the outside, like any other. The children were asleep. The house was quiet, wrapped in the soft hum of a countryside night. But inside the living room, something unspoken had been gathering for months. The weight of distance, the exhaustion of silence, the feeling of two lives moving in separate directions no matter how hard they tried to stay aligned. Depp had returned from another long shoot. His face carried shadows Vanessa didn't recognize anymore. Not the tiredness of work, but the tiredness of someone who had been away too long, from home, from himself, from her. He dropped his suitcase by the door and sat down, his posture collapsing inward, as if even sitting upright required a strength he no longer had. Vanessa watched him quietly. She knew this version of him. The faraway eyes, the restless fingers, the way he spoke less and drifted more. She had hoped that this time would be different, that the time apart would make him miss the life they built. But something in the air told her it hadn't. And then, softly, like someone asking a question she already feared the answer to, she said, "Do you still want to come back to this home?" He didn't respond. Not immediately. Not soon enough. The silence stretched, long, heavy, almost unbearable. It wasn't the silence of confusion or surprise. It was the silence of truth finally catching up to them. Vanessa felt her chest tighten, not in anger, but in understanding. She could see it in the way he stared at the floor, in the way his hands trembled slightly, in the way he looked like a man torn between gratitude and guilt. He loved this home. He loved her. But love, sometimes, isn't enough to keep someone from drifting in the direction they feel pulled toward. That silence, more than any argument, any confession, any goodbye, ended 14 years. There were no raised voices, no shattered glasses, no dramatic storm, just two people sitting in the same room, realizing they were no longer moving at the same rhythm. Depp chose freedom again, not because he wanted to hurt her, but because he didn't know how to stay without becoming someone he no longer recognized. Vanessa chose peace, even if that peace meant letting go of the man she had built her world around. When he finally looked at her, eyes wet but resigned, she didn't cry. She simply nodded. It was the nod of someone who has loved deeply, lost quietly, and understood that holding on would break them both. Sometimes relationships end not with a door closing, but with a question hanging in the air, and a silence that answers it. When people speak about Johnny Depp and Vanessa Paradis, they often focus on the one thing they didn't do. They never married. 14 years, 2 children, a life built across continents, and no wedding. To some, it looked like hesitation. To others, a lack of commitment. But their story reveals something far more complex, far more intimate. Sometimes love stays alive because it isn't forced into structures it cannot hold. Their relationship didn't avoid marriage due to fear or indifference. It avoided marriage because they had 2 different ways of surviving the world. Depp, who had grown up inside instability, always felt that too much structure could suffocate him. Marriage, to him, wasn't safety. It was the memory of slammed doors, arguments behind thin walls, a childhood where love felt conditional and fragile. He didn't fear Vanessa. He feared losing himself. Vanessa, on the other hand, understood commitment in a quieter language. She didn't need papers. She needed presence. She didn't need ceremonies. She needed consistency. Her idea of love wasn't tied to rituals. It was tied to the daily act of choosing each other. She had learned early that fame demanded proof, but real relationships didn't. Real relationships needed patience, not signatures. For 14 years, they lived inside this unspoken pact. And those years weren't less real because they lacked a wedding. If anything, those years were the commitment. It was built in the mornings she spent alone with the children while he filmed on the other side of the world. Built in the nights he held her after long shoots, when he didn't need applause, only rest. Built in the ordinary moments, the ones that never made headlines, where love isn't loud but constant. Their story reminds us of something uncomfortable yet deeply human. Some relationships last longer when they are not boxed in. Some loves breathe better without labels, without expectations, without the weight of tradition pressing down on them. They didn't marry because marriage would have changed the balance that kept them together. It would have imposed a structure Vanessa didn't need and Depp couldn't handle. They understood this, even when the world didn't. After their separation, their paths mirrored their inner truths. Vanessa retreated into peace. She chose her children, her music, her quiet artistry. She rebuilt her life the same way she had lived it, softly, privately, without spectacle. She didn't step into new chaos. She stepped into clarity. Her stability remained intact because it had always come from within, never from the presence of another person. Depp's journey went in the opposite direction. Without the sanctuary of Paris, without Vanessa's steadiness, without the gentle rhythm she protected for him, he drifted into storms. Lawsuits, public scrutiny, struggles with substances, Hollywood pressure collapsing in on him. Each crisis revealed something heartbreaking. Vanessa had been the anchor he never knew he needed until she was gone. She had been the quiet shelter that kept his shadows from swallowing him whole. In that contrast, her peace, his turbulence, their story finds its final lesson. Love is not always about staying forever. Sometimes it is about being exactly what the other person needed in a specific chapter of life. Sometimes it is about giving someone a version of home they can only hold on to for as long as they are able. Their relationship didn't fail. It simply lived out its full shape. And as we look at their 14 years through the lens of time, one question lingers: gentle, haunting, necessary. In a world obsessed with proof, paperwork, and permanence, do stories like Johnny Depp and Vanessa Paradis remind us of a rarer kind of love? A love held together not by documents, but by trust alone?